Welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, CFBNP, and the National Cemetery Administration Scheduling Office. My name is Trulesta Pauling. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the right of your screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. This presentation is not available, but a slide with links and resources will be provided to everyone that registered and joined this webinar. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Mr. J. Dalrymple and Mr. Steve Ecker for this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Reverend Conrad Washington serves as the Director for the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He is retired from the United States Marine Corps with 20 years of active duty service with a combat tour in 2004 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom II. Reverend Washington is an ordained non-denominational minister in the Christian faith and actively serving. He received his master's degree of divinity in pastoral studies from Moody Theological Seminary, Master's of Arts in Business Management from the University of Redlands, and a Bachelor of Science degree in education from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Mr. Washington.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate it. Well, thank all of you for joining us today. We appreciate you. Again, there's a buffet of webinars out there, and we know that you could have chosen any place to stop, and we're glad that you stopped by the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. We're grateful for that. And today I'm excited to have, again, Jay and Steve going to share some very important information that's applicable to our veterans and their families. So thank you, you two, for joining us. I know you're busy as well as our colleagues here in the VA. We're excited to have all of you join us. We want you to know that we do this every month, 3 to 4 webinars. We're all inclusive. We have many webinars on many topics governing veterans and their families. So please subscribe, and you get an opportunity to see the QR code at the end of this presentation to subscribe to our webinars. So thank you all very much, and be blessed.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. J. Dalrymple, Director of the National Cemetery Administration Scheduling Office, who will provide some opening remarks. Please read a summary of his bio on the screen. Mr. Dalrymple has been the Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office and Deputy Director of Field Programs since October 13, 2019. He is responsible for all scheduling and eligibility activities, including pre-need determinations for veterans and family members. Mr. Dalrymple graduated in 2019 from the National Cemetery Administration Comprehensive Year-Long Cemetery Director Intern Program. Mr. Dalrymple is an Air Force veteran. At this time, I give you Mr. Dalrymple for opening remarks.
Thank you, True, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the privilege to speak with you today. As Trulesta said, my name is Jay Dalrymple. I've been with the National Cemetery Administration as the Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office in St. Louis since 2019. And over the last couple of years, we have had the honor to support the webinars with True and Mr. Washington, and truly appreciate it. Really, our reason for being here is, for those who may be unfamiliar with NCA, the VA operates 155 national cemeteries and 34 soldiers' lots and monument sites in 42 states and Puerto Rico. There are more than 4 million Americans, including veterans of every war and conflict, buried in VA's national cemeteries. And it is a benefit that all veterans have earned through their service and sacrifice. In addition to NCA's and VA cemeteries, we also provide grant funding and partner with 122 state and tribal veteran cemeteries across the country as well. So today we wanted to share some information with you on a couple of very important topics. Looking at what is the pre-need program, and then also what is the eligibility requirements for burial in a VA National Cemetery. So we want to answer any questions you may have about the National Cemetery and the pre-need program, and definitely want to hear your questions so we can respond to them as quickly as possible and give you the information you need. One of the biggest things with our pre-need burial program is it offers living veterans and service members and their dependents the opportunity to start end-of-life planning and coordination for the families when that time comes. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, True, and let's begin with the webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Dalrymple. Now I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Mr. Steve Ecker. Steve is the Assistant Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office, NCSO, since April the 12th, 2020. In this position, Mr. Ecker is responsible for assisting the Director with all scheduling and eligibility activities for veterans and their families. Mr. Ecker is a veteran. He was in the Navy. He is a member of the United States Navy Ceremonial Guard, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, Washington, D.C. At this time, I give you our presenter for today, Mr. Steve Ecker. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trulesta and Jay for the introduction. And I'll echo what Jay said. It's always an honor and privilege to work with your guys' program and share this information in these quarterly webinars. It's important information, and it's a topic that not necessarily everybody wants to or comfortable talking about. So hopefully you find this information useful and helpful as you go forward. So looking at the agenda, today we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to cover general eligibility requirements for burial in a VA National Cemetery, what is included in the burial benefit, and then we'll go over some frequently asked questions. We'll kind of go over persons eligible for burial. What does that mean? What do you need to qualify for burial? We'll discuss the pre-need eligibility program, an overview and how to apply, and how to fill out the form and what to expect after you apply for the pre-need benefit. So let's start with the first slide. Let's talk about what is included in the burial benefit. Before I start with this slide, I want to point out a distinct difference or a bit of information. When we refer to burial benefit, as far as the National Cemetery Administration is concerned, we're speaking specifically of burial memorialization in a national cemetery. There's a lot of confusion out there as far as monetary burial benefits. So when you hear burial benefit, it's easy to just lump everything in with the National Cemetery Administration. But important to note, the National Cemetery Administration does not administer any monetary benefits. That's to include reimbursement, allowances, or anything like that. All that is administered by the Veteran Benefits Administration. So just wanted to put that distinction out there because that is a point of confusion for a lot of people. But as far as what's included in the burial benefit for the National Cemetery Administration, it includes a grave site in any national cemetery with available space, and that it includes casket or cremation burials, a grave liner or vault, the opening and closing of the grave, and perpetual care of that grave site. A government headstone, marker, or niche cover is included, along with a burial flag, Presidential Memorial Certificate or PMC, and military honors. While technically not part of the burial benefit, but NCA and our office here at the scheduling office will assist callers and families with coordinating that, whether with the Department of Defense or through the local veteran service organization or the cemetery honors groups. So let's talk now about what is the family's responsibility, what's not included in the burial benefit. This includes costs associated with funeral home preparation or services. So any preparation of the body, caskets, as you see as we go down the list, costs pertaining to cremation services. Again, transportation of any sort to include transportation to that national cemetery. Cost for funeral home storage in the event that is required. So really the easiest way we like to explain this is once you drive through the cemetery gates with your loved one or that veteran, the NCA covers everything after that point. Cost for obtaining a gravesite in a private cemetery if the veteran will not be interred in a national. Again, as I stated in the opening, families may be eligible through the veteran burial allowance. And again, that's administered by the Veteran Benefits Administration. That's a flat allowance to help offset some of the costs that the family may incur. And then that you can inquire about that or get more information by contacting VBA or visiting their website. An important note, any cost associated with disinterring an individual from a private cemetery for a VA national cemetery is not covered. So for instance, if the family chooses not to inter in a national cemetery, and the person, was eligible, if they decide later on that they want to bring them to a national, that would be the family's cost to coordinate that transportation and move to the national cemetery. So now let's talk about some frequently asked questions. Through the different iterations of this webinar, we've captured some of the most frequently asked questions and questions we thought would be most helpful to address. The first one is, can I be buried in any national cemetery? The answer is yes. Veterans and eligible dependents can be buried anywhere in the country in any national cemetery with available grave sites. So no geographical restrictions apply. So you could live in California. If for any reason, say you want to be buried in Calverton in New York, as long as there's available space, there is no geographical restrictions. Next question, is the spouse required to be buried in the same national cemetery as the veteran? The answer is no. They are not required to be in the same national cemetery, although most times they are, which is understandable, but there are many instances where the veteran or spouse might have passed years ago and families moved or relocated or different things have changed. And now they want to inter the spouse or the veteran in a different cemetery, maybe close with family or those type of things. So there is no requirement for the spouse and the veteran to be together. Will my spouse be buried next to me or with me in the same gravesite? So again, non-veteran spouses of eligible veterans will be interred in the same gravesite. Or in the instances where both individuals are veterans and determined eligible, there is a possibility to reserve a gravesite or an adjacent gravesite may be set aside for the surviving spouse at their time of need. But that's the only time that the spouse would get their own separate gravesite if it was both veteran that are determined eligible in their own right. Does it matter if I am casketed or cremated? It does not matter, but it does depend on site availability for that national cemetery you may be looking at. So you can get more information on that, by visiting the website, but it doesn't matter if you're casketed or cremated. It just depends on the availability at that particular cemetery. A big one that draws confusion in the last question here, does the National Cemetery manage Arlington Cemetery? The answer is no. And the National Cemetery does not manage Arlington. That's run by the Department of the Army. And inquiries for Arlington should be directed directly to Arlington National. Although we do a lot of partnering with Arlington, we do not actually administer and determine eligibility for Arlington. So that's run by the Army, and any questions should be contacted directly to them. Okay, so some additional questions. Is my wife listed on the headstone also? The answer is yes. Veterans information is generally on the front, and spouse information is presented on the back of the headstone. Can I get a headstone if I'm cremated? It's law that all grave sites must be marked in a national cemetery. But besides that, yes, a headstone is provided and required for all remains types. Are there costs to have my spouse buried? We have a lot of questions about this. And there is some confusion as far as different regulations and monetary requirements between state veteran cemeteries and national cemeteries. But for national cemeteries, there are no cost for burial benefits provided. Again, families are responsible for funeral home fees or other expenses incurred before arriving at the national cemetery, but there are no costs for spouse burials or any other eligible dependents. Can I request just a service and military honors if I am not being interred in a national cemetery? That is referred to as a military service, and that's perfectly fine. Families are allotted time for a service or military honors at the cemetery and or shelter, and there is no interment that's required. If burial will take place in a private cemetery at a later date, that's fine. We see that a lot where families may have a family plot, but the family still wants to have military honors and a service. Or in the instance where, the veteran or spouse may be cremated and they're not quite ready to let go of their loved one, they're still more than welcome to have a service and military honors, and then just do that interment at a later date. The last question, what is the difference between in-ground cremation burial and being placed in the columbarium wall? Kind of self-explanatory, but for those who may not be aware, an in-ground cremation burial is like a traditional casket burial where it's placed to rest in the ground in a grave liner, similar to a casket burial. And then a columbarium or mausoleum, as some may call it, contains niches for placement where the cremated remains and the urn are placed above ground. Okay, our last list of questions here. If you are 100% service connected, what will the VA cover if buried in a national cemetery? So there really is no distinction as far as service connection or any rate. If you're an eligible veteran or service member or dependent, it's the same across the board. The VA covers all services that are included in the burial benefit, as I outlined before. Does the VA help to pay to reserve a gravesite in an outside private cemetery? As I kind of touched on, anything outside of the national cemetery gates or anything with a private cemetery, the cost would be associated with the family. Again, the family, but however, if they are interred in a private cemetery, the family still may request eligibility to see if they qualify for a VA headstone or marker. Is there a time limit for requesting burial? My husband's cremated remains were not placed in the VA National Cemetery at his time of passing 3 years ago. Am I still able to apply? The answer is yes. There are no time limits. The family could wait a year, they could wait 5 years, they could wait 30 years. There is no time frame, or time restriction on when you have to apply. At any time, say the veteran's cremated, family holds onto the urn for 3 years and they say, I think I'm ready to bury my loved one. Reach out to our office here. We'll set up a request and set up that burial for your loved one at the National Cemetery. My dad and I are both veterans, so we need 2 separate VA Form 10,007 forms and another for my mother, correct? So now we're kind of talking about the pre-need program. The VA Form 10,007 is the form required to request a pre-need determination. But the answer to that is each individual requesting a pre-need determination is required to have their own form. This includes veteran spouses and any other dependents that may be eligible. Can you use your VA award letter with all the information on it to apply for a pre-need determination? So this is for any veteran who may be service connected and want to provide their award letter. While we can't use it on its own to determine eligibility, As the DD 214 is the discharge document that is required, but we can determine possibly initial eligibility from the service-connected disability rating. And important to note here, you may be eligible for burial if you are 0% or greater service-connected. Just keep that in mind as you speak with families or veterans or family members on the line. That's important to note, that 0% or greater service connection does qualify. So now let's change gears here a little bit and talk about headstones and markers. So as I mentioned, a headstone or marker is part of the burial benefit. And let's talk about what is included and listed on the headstone. Many of you may have been in a national cemetery and familiar with this. They are all very standard, but they include the person's legal name, branch of service, the beginning and ending dates of person's life, date of birth, date of death, and the section. It also could include, their branch of service, war periods, their rank, and then the families have the option for an additional inscription, which the cemetery will go over with the family at the day of the service. So there are some options for additional inscriptions, but generally each government headstone is pretty uniform with the information included as we just went over. So let's talk a little bit about who is eligible for burial in a national cemetery. Veterans, service members, spouses, and dependents may be eligible for burial if they meet some of the requirements. One of these must be true to qualify for the burial benefit. And when I say burial benefit, again, I'm referring to National Cemetery Administration burial benefits as far as burial or memorialization in a national cemetery. Veteran who didn't receive a dishonorable discharge, a service member who died while on active duty for training, or inactive duty for training, a spouse or minor child of a veteran, and in some cases, unmarried adult children of veterans with maybe mental or physical disability may be eligible. So the NCA defines veteran as a person served in the active military, naval, or air service and who was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. So now let's talk about some common categories of individuals that we see apply. Let's start with veteran with one or more days of active service. This pertains to enlisted members who enlisted on or before September 7th of 1980, and officers on or before October 16th of 1981. For these individuals, it requires discharge or separation from active duty under conditions other than dishonorable. So before September 7, 1980, all an individual needed was 1 day of active service and an honorable discharge to qualify. So those are important dates as we go through this. As you'll see, the September 7, 1980 and the October 16th, 81. So now let's look at post September 7, 1980. After September 7th of 1980, the law now required a minimum of 24 consecutive months of active service. So any enlisted person in a regular component after September 7th of 1980 or officer after October 16th now is required to serve a 24-month minimum active service requirement or 2 years. There are some exceptions to this. For those that have discharged under early out or hardship or any kind of service-connected disability. So there are some exceptions to this, but in general, if you enlisted after September 7th, 1980, 24 months is required to be eligible. Persons with pensions and compensable status. So death benefits shall be granted to persons recognized by law as having pensionable or compensable status. Again, this requires discharge other than dishonorable conditions, and persons receiving service-connected compensation, as I mentioned before, at the rate of 0% or greater, are eligible for burial. It's important to note as well, as we talk about the pre-need program, if for some reason at any time an individual establishes a service connection, this would qualify them for burial. So even if they were previously not eligible or might have received a letter or correspondence stating they're not eligible, that would kind of change everything for that person. So that's important to kind of keep in your mind as you talk to individuals. If someone is not quite service connected and they may have a pending claim, that's an important note to think about as their as their requests are rated. And so if they do become service connected, they could be eligible for burial. Surviving spouses and unremarried spouses. So a spouse of an unremarried surviving spouse of a veteran would be eligible. So now let's kind of change gears and talk about some common denial reasons. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to be eligible for burial in National Cemetery. But what we like to say, what we kind of pride ourselves on here at the scheduling office is we will do everything we can to get to yes. Of course, we will follow federal law, but we'll do everything we can to try to obtain any information that may make that person eligible. But in the event that the person does not qualify, our office is the only office in the country that has the legal authority to deny a burial. So unfortunately, some common reasons for denial include dishonorable for VA purposes. That's when an individual has service that's other than honorable, and the VA determines that their service is dishonorable for VA purposes. Active duty for training is a huge one for us. This pertains mostly to reservists who might have served their 6 or 8 year enlistment. They might have done all their monthly their 6 months of active duty for training, and were discharged honorably. Unfortunately, active duty for training does not qualify for the burial benefit. Less than 24 months of service. This kind of talks to the September 7, 1980. So anyone who enlisted after September 7, 1980, who didn't meet that 24-month requirement would not be eligible. And reserve or guard time, these are our reserve persons who might have served 10, 15 years, were honorable, but unfortunately were never called to active duty. Or they might have been called to active duty under Title 32 under a state call-up. An important distinction for the National Cemetery Administration, and as far as eligibility, the active duty, if they're called, has to be under Title 10 under an executive order. Some other ones, no military information found, and some other denial reasons. But again, we'll do everything we can to get to yes for that individual, and we'll do all the legwork to make sure we have all the information available before we make a decision. So now let's change gears here again and talk about pre-need eligibility. As Jay mentioned in the opening, this allows individuals in advance of need to find out if they're eligible for burial. And of course, the main reason for this is to make the burial process easier for the family at their time of need and eliminate delays. As the name says, this is before the time of need. This is for burial in advance. If there is a death or it is considered a time of need request, wouldn't go through the pre-need program, you would just contact the scheduling office and we'd set up a case. So the pre-need program, it's for requests for VA national cemeteries only, and it does not apply to any particular national cemetery and is not a reservation. So that's important to note, that even if you put a certain cemetery on your pre-need form, that doesn't guarantee or reserve you a spot in that cemetery. If for some reason it would fill up, you would have to choose another cemetery. Approval status may change, and additional verification at the time of need may be required. If we determine someone eligible at this time, we're just stating just that. As of now, that individual is eligible, but we will go back to review at their time of need to see if any circumstances may have changed. Recommended applicants for the pre-need program. Of course, we encourage anyone to apply, but as we've kind of seen as the program has gone on, If you're retired, if you know you served active duty, if you are service connected, you're eligible. What people we want to focus on is unmarried adult children. As I mentioned prior, those are individuals who are physically or mentally disabled. Sometimes those require additional documentation information, so sometimes those can take a little longer. So if you have questions about an unmarried adult child that may be eligible, we want to see requests for those. Reservists who are unsure if they qualify. For those who said, well, I think I might have been called to active duty. I'm not sure if it was Title 10. I was called for a hurricane or this or that. Those are the individuals that should be sending requests. Veterans or family members with any kind of question regarding their service. Well, I think I might have I think I may qualify, but I'm not exactly sure. Um, Feel free to submit a pre-need application. And then surviving remarried spouses of previously interred veterans. Any kind of spouses that are out there, if you remarried, you're still eligible for burial under your previous spouses and that veteran's eligibility. So that's important to note. So what information does someone need to apply for the burial program? Like most benefits, we're going to need the standard stuff: social security number, date of birth, place of birth, as much information you have on military information. If you're applying for a spouse, unmarried adult child, we'll need their information. And in the right-hand column of the chart, if you're applying on behalf of someone, maybe you're a VSO, you're a legal guardian, we may need additional documents. So let's talk about actually filling out the form. You know, as we all know, most know, if you're a veteran or work with veterans agencies, or there's a required form for every benefit. So this is the VA form 40-10,007. This is the required form for pre-need eligibility. What you want to do first is choose the national cemetery where you prefer to be buried. Again, this isn't a reservation, but if you have a cemetery in the area, you'll want to list that. Again, it's for VA national cemeteries only, does not apply to Arlington, and does not guarantee you a spot. But, you want to gather the supporting documents. Be sure to fill out an application for each person, as I stated before, and we refer to those as claimants. Each claimant requesting determination needs their own separate form, signed by that individual. So looking at the form here, it's broken into three sections. The first section is the veteran information. This will be unique to the veteran, which may be different from the claimant. So in the instances where the veteran is the claimant, of course, this information will be the same as Section 2. But for spouses or other dependents, Section 1 will be the veteran information. As we go to the next slide, we'll see Section 2 is for the claimant. This will be specific to the claimant, which may not be the same as the veteran. So there is a section, as you can see, to identify your relationship to the veteran. And then the claimant's information on the right-hand section, all their standard information: social security number, place of birth, date of birth. Section 3 is the certification. So again, it's important that each claimant have their own form signed by each claimant. So how do you apply for the burial benefit? The preferred method is through the va.gov website, and that is probably the easiest way for individuals, as long as you have a computer and you're comfortable doing that. You're also able to download the paper application and mail it or fax it in. For faster processing, you ask that you submit all documentation with the application. So if we always say err on the side of more. If you think it may be helpful, send it. The more information we have, the better, and we'll determine what's needed and not needed as far as military documentation or other documentation. So what happens after you apply? Our goal is to complete your application within 120 days. As of now, we're processing applications much faster than 120 days, but our goal is to get that usually within 120 days. We'll send you information via the Postal Service once we have a final eligibility determination. If for some reason we need additional information, we'll indicate that as well. But if eligible, we'll send an approval letter along with an envelope and some other information to store that letter. If for any reason anyone has any updates, they can contact our office, choose option 4, which is our pre-need office. And the pre-need team is here from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. We please ask that if you wait to hear back on your application rather than resubmitting. Resubmitting will just create multiple requests and could potentially cause delays in processing. So that's all I had for you today. Again, I hope that this information was helpful. It's not necessarily a topic that everybody wants to talk about, but we're here at the National Cemetery Scheduling Office to answer any questions you may have and are here to help. Thank you for everyone's attendance and have a good afternoon. Drew, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Steve, for that very informative presentation. Now we will address questions in the Q&A box. I'll read the questions out loud and Mr. Ecker and Mr. Dalrymple will provide a response. If we are unable to get around to everyone's questions today, we'll take your question down and get a response back to you in a couple of days. We have your email address. Okay, the first question comes from Amy Stevens. Is there a VA navigator that a grieving family can call? I have been actually dealing with someone who has had an unexpected death in the past week of a family member. The funeral home apparently is not being helpful. What is the best referral I could give this person?
So for this one, I did answer this in the Q&A box. If the family is looking at burial in a national cemetery, I recommend they call the scheduling office right away. We can walk them through process, any questions that they have to help them with their determination. So calling the National Cemetery Scheduling Office at 800-535-1117, option 1 for English, option 2 if you're Spanish speaking. And then we can help in that way. And then if they have additional questions that maybe they're looking at a private cemetery, we can get you to VBA as well for potential allowances and other options available.
Thank you, Mr. Dalrymple. Ms. Stevens, that number again is 1-800-535-1117, and it's presently on the slide that we have. If you're calling in, I just wanted to repeat that number for you. Again, we will read the question out loud because we do have some folks that have called in and are not on the computer, so everyone can have the response to the questions that are being asked. The second question is coming from Darrell Brown. Is there a waiting list for the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific? Who is the contact to be buried at Arlington?
So let's take the first one. The National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, or we call that the Punch Bowl, is kind of a unique cemetery. Not so much a waiting list, but they are limited in their burial options. So if you're looking at cremated remains above ground in a columbarium, they have that available. If you're looking for a casket service, that's a little bit different because the Punch Bowl only has grave sites that get freed up potentially as DOD continues to look at unknown remains. They will disinter and do genetic testing. If they identify who it is, then the family can make a decision on whether they want to place them back at the Punch Bowl or place them somewhere else. So the best thing to do there is if you're looking at a casketed burial, is you can either call the cemetery or you can call us and we actually reach out to the cemetery for you. So long story short, National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific does have limited space, with cremated remains being the easiest way to get interred there. As far as who's the contact to be buried at Arlington, so they have a different process. They have what's called an interment services group, very similar to the National Cemetery Scheduling Office, where you can call in. That number is 877-907-8585, and they're available Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 Eastern Time, and then Saturday from 9 to 2:30 as well. You can also look up a lot of this information on the arlingtoncemetery.mil website for Arlington specifically.
Thank you so much, Steve. And we can get that information to you, Mr. Brown, if you did not capture all of those numbers and those closing times. The next question is coming from Ms. Patricia Caldwell. So if they have a SCD rating, but less than 24 months of service, do they still get burial benefits?
So, Steve, I'm going to let you answer this one because I know I'm probably going to screw it up. But my recommendation is reach out, submit the application so we can confirm.
Yeah, so what we'll want to do in that case is, as Jay said, submit an application. What we'll do is we'll get your information from our VA systems. And for less than 24 months, what we do is we'll send those to the regional office and we'll get an administrative decision made, and they'll determine if you qualify. Although the 24-month requirement's not met, that's one of the exceptions that I talked about. So they'll determine if an exception is met on that and determine if you're eligible. But generally, I would say yes, but again, we'd have to get that adjudicated with the regional office. So please submit an application if that is the case, so we can get that determination made.
Thank you, Steve. Question 4 is coming from Miriam. According to the previous site and as defined, veterans are considered, in quote, active duty personnel. Therefore, reservists who have retired or have had active time are not eligible. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. So a reservist has a couple options, right? Steve talked a little bit about Title 10 executive orders versus Title 32. So Title 32 are state-related orders where Title 10 is an executive order from the president. Title 10 is considered active duty, and as long as you serve that entire time, we will count that as active duty. Now, from a retired reservist, Steve, they have to have received,
Yeah,
started receiving pay.
Yeah. So and I didn't touch on that in the presentation. I think I usually do. So thanks for bringing that up. Yes, for reservist or guardsmen, you would have to have served 20 years or be eligible for retirement pay at age 60. So if you are retired from the reserve, you would qualify aside from having any active duty. If you're not eligible as a retired, or if you're not retired as a reservist, you would have had to have had that Title 10 active service. But if you are retired, you are eligible.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Steve. Next question comes from Ms. Karen. Will all of us receive contact information needed for burial and the information needed for DIC if eligible?
So you have the number now for the scheduling office around burial in a national cemetery. If you're looking for burial at a state or tribal veteran cemetery, you're going to want to contact that cemetery directly. And then for private, you're going to call the 827-1000 VBA number for burial benefits there.
Right. As far as DIC, the dependent indemnity, that is one of those benefits that I talked about that is not administered by NCA. So that's a Veteran Benefit Administration benefit. So you would, as Jay said, you would contact the Veteran Benefits Administration to inquire about that.
Okay, thank you so much. Question 5 comes from Veronica B. Does the DD 214 have to be original or can it be a copy?
So we're going to want you to hold on to your original. That's like gold. And for all of us veterans, definitely want to keep that in a safe space. So it can be a copy. And we are going to ask if you have the member for a copy of it. That's what we would be looking for.
Thank you. Question 6 comes from Deborah Alston. Does NCA cover burial for my special needs daughter? Father retired from the Army with 22 years of service.
So Steve, you want to take this one because this is another.
Yeah. So for in this instance, we covered this in the presentation that we refer to that as an unmarried adult child. So that is for any individual who has a mental or physical disability that was diagnosed prior to the age of 18 or prior to the age of 21 or 23 if pursuing a college degree in an accredited institution. So for those, we would encourage to submit a pre-need application. And those are the ones where we would require some additional documentation. We require a certain letter from the doctor and from the family, kind of just stating the condition and the level of care. So we would have to, review that and determine if they do meet the criteria for an unmarried adult child. So please get that, submit a pre-need application so we can get that determination made.
Thank you so much, Steve. The next question comes from Patricia Caldwell. Again, her question is a dependent child still eligible once they are an adult and married?
Unfortunately, they are not. So when we look at a dependent child, they're single up to the age of 18, unless they're pursuing college education, then it goes to 23. But once they are considered an adult and are married, they are no longer eligible under the veteran parent.
Thank you so much, Jay. Next question comes from Jaw Dooley. How can a veteran be buried in a national cemetery if they do not have a state ID, but have other information showing they lived in the state, but had to enter an assisted living facility prior to death?
So a state ID is not required for a national cemetery. Doesn't matter, as Steve talked about earlier, if you lived in California and preferred to be buried in New York at Calverton, you can do that. So the state ID and that information is not pertinent to making you eligible for burial. We're going to look at your military service. So we would look to try to locate any service records if you do not have those any longer or are unavailable. But that's what we're going to go off of is your military service.
Thank you. Question 9 comes from Joel Gray. Does one need to go to a local funeral home with an eligibility approval letter?
No.
Hmm.
So funeral home can assist you. If you're at your time of need, you don't need an eligibility approval letter. If your loved one has passed and they do have uh, an approval letter from us from a pre-need application, I would definitely provide that to the funeral home. And then as they call into us, we would re-verify that information anyway. In the event that your loved one is cremated, you don't have to go through a funeral home to get to us. You can call the scheduling office directly and work to get the case established, and we can get the service scheduled for you directly without any funeral home involved.
Thank you so much, Jay. I think we have 3 more questions left, and I think we can get through them. The next question is from Miss Jessie Myers, or Mr. Jesse Myers. Does open and closing of the grave included in the burial benefit payment?
So this may be kind of crossing. So in a national cemetery, there is no burial benefit payment. The opening and closing of the gravesite is included in all the services. The burial benefit payment, whether it be plot allowance, headstone marker, or other burial and funeral cost allowances, are provided by the Veterans Benefits Administration. If you're planning burial in a private cemetery, that's when the burial benefit payment could be included.
Thank you. The next question comes from Mr. John Laurie. How can next of kin retrieve a DD-214 if they do not know the enter date and exit date?
So discharges can be a little goofy, especially if you're requesting the information from the National Archives Records Administration. They're going to look for it based on social service number, any information you can provide. And in the event at time of need, if a discharge is not available, we will collect pertinent information to help us locate that discharge for you. It's not so much knowing the entrance on duty date or your exit date. But we are going to look for like social security number, service number, any place of birth, any information you can provide will help us locate that discharge.
Thank you, Jay. Next question comes from Patricia Caldwell. Is there a separate application if you didn't get a pre-need eligibility and a veteran dies? And then in parentheses, given the need to expedite the decision if they just died.
So a pre-need eligibility determination is not needed to be buried for burial at a national cemetery. If a veteran passes away and the family or their decision is to be buried in a national cemetery, we need you to call the National Cemetery Scheduling Office right away, and we will establish a case and work through that with you. Again, a pre-need eligibility application is not needed for burial in a national cemetery. Just call the scheduling office.
Okay, next and last question comes from Karen. Does the veteran have to be 100% to receive burial benefits?
I'm assuming that's a service connection at 100%. The answer is no. All they have to is, as Steve walked through some of the eligibility requirements, honorable discharge, served more than 24 months after September 7th, 1980. As long as you've honorably served and you meet the law requirements for eligibility, an individual can be buried in a national cemetery. Service connections are a different benefit that do come into play, but you don't have to be service connected to be interred in a national cemetery.
All right, thank you so much, Jay and Steve, for all of that wealth of information. If we need to reach out to you and any presenters, please see their point of contact information on the screen right now. You can also reach out to our team for any information as well. One more question from Tifiana Tuani. I apologize if I missed the previous questions. If I have a other than honorable, how do I attain or get it waived?
You're not necessarily going to get it waived, but I would request that if you're interested in burial in a national cemetery, that you do submit a pre-need application. Other questions you may have, you may be able to go to the closest VA regional office for support as well. Steve, do you have any other input?
Yeah, I would just say, as Jay said, submit a pre-need application. What we'll do is we'll request your file through the Record Center or through VA systems. And what we'll do in that case is we'll send the request and all the discharge documents to the regional office. And what they'll do is they'll review all the circumstances around your service and determine if you would qualify for the burial benefit. If for some reason no exceptions are met, then it could, they would determine if you would qualify or not.
Thank you so much, Steve. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks.
Thank you, True. Jay and Steve, you guys are awesome. I'm not just saying that. I'm saying you're awesome because the number of questions we get. So that just goes to show you how important this topic is and how well you guys are answering. We appreciate you. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to you coming back again. For all of you all who's still there, thank you for joining us. And just so you know, we'll be back, same station, same time, July 30th for Survivors Assistance. So we look forward to seeing you all. So be blessed and take care of yourselves.
If you register for this webinar, we will provide you with links and resources Jay and Steve spoke about today in their presentation. A recording of this webinar and the transcript will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a safe and wonderful day. Goodbye.